There is a specific kind of person who takes a vacation, sleeps 9 hours a night for 10 days, does everything the recovery advice says to do, and boards the return flight home already tired. Not from the travel, from knowing the people waiting at the other end of it. You probably didn't frame it that way. You framed it as looking forward to getting back, and you were, partly. But underneath that, something in you registered the return the way a person registers a long shift starting. Not dread, just readiness. The antenna going back up. The processing resuming. I noticed this in myself before I had any language for it. Coming back from somewhere quiet, feeling the shift happen before I'd walked through my own front door. A recalibration, automatic and immediate, toward everyone else's emotional weather. I didn't think of it as anything. I thought of it as just being home. It took longer than it should have to understand that the tiredness wasn't from being home. It was from what home required of me, invisibly, continuously, in ways that rest had never been designed to reach. Here is what you've been told, in some version, by someone who meant well. You need better limits, more rest, more time for yourself, fewer obligations, more space, a better balance between what you give and what you keep. The math is off and you need to correct it. This is not wrong advice. It is advice aimed at a different problem than the one you have. Because the problem is not your schedule. The problem is not the volume of demands on your time, or the difficulty of the people in your life, or the number of things on your plate. Those things are real, and they matter, and they are, by and large, beside the point. The problem is something running underneath all of that. Something that does not appear on your calendar and cannot be addressed by clearing it. Something you have been doing, automatically, continuously, largely without knowing, for years. You feel what other people feel, not as a choice, not as a deliberate act of compassion, as a reflex. Your nervous system reads the emotional state of every room you walk into, every conversation you have, every person who is quietly not okay in your vicinity, and it treats that signal as information requiring your response. Not someone's response. Yours. Immediately. Before you've been asked. You have been doing this for so long that it does not feel like labor. It feels like perception. It feels like just being a person who pays attention. It is labor. It is continuous, invisible, uncompensated labor. And it is almost certainly the reason you feel the way you feel. Not because your life is hard, but because you have been living two lives simultaneously. Your own, and a version of everyone else's. The word tired is not inaccurate. It is just aimed at the wrong thing entirely. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1, What This Actually Is. There's a woman sitting in her car in the parking garage at 6:47 in the morning. She got here early. Not because she had to, because the car is quiet. Because for 11 minutes before she walks through the lobby and the day begins and other people's needs enter the atmosphere, she gets to exist without managing anything. She does this every day. She has told herself it's just how she likes to start the morning. It is not how she likes to start the morning. It is how she survives it. She is not a dramatic person. She would not describe herself as sensitive. She would describe herself, if pressed, as someone who cares about doing things well and takes her relationships seriously and tries to show up for people. She would say she has a lot on her plate. She would not say she is exhausted in any way that sounds clinical or serious. She would probably say she's just tired and follow it with something self-deprecating about needing a vacation and change the subject. She's been calling it by the wrong name for years. The word exhaustion gets used to describe several genuinely different things, and this matters more than it sounds. Ordinary tiredness is a resource problem. You spent energy. You need to replenish it. Sleep, rest, time off. These are the correct tools, and they work. The tiredness lifts. This is the tiredness most people mean when they use the word. It's real, it's common, and it is not what this book is about. Then there is stress response, the activated state that comes from sustained pressure, high stakes, uncertain outcomes. Your nervous system running hot because the environment demands it. This one is more corrosive than ordinary tiredness. It takes longer to recover from. But it still responds to the correct interventions. Remove enough pressure, lower the stakes, restore some predictability. The system downregulates. People recover from this too. What you're dealing with is neither of those. The clinical literature has a term for it, emotional exhaustion. But the clinical definition is narrower than the experience, and it tends to live in the context of professional roles. Burned-out nurses, overextended therapists, people in helping professions who depleted their emotional reserves over years of high-demand human contact. The research is real. The phenomenon is real, but it carries an implication that the source is external. That if you changed the job, or reduced the caseload, or left the profession, the tank would refill. For some people, it would. You are not those people. You are the person who changed the job and still felt it, who took the sabbatical and came back the same, who genuinely has, by any objective measure, a manageable life, and who nonetheless wakes up with something already gone, some reservoir already lower than it should be, before the day has asked anything of you at all. That is the tell, the morning deficit, the thing that is already spent before you've spent it. I did what most people do when something keeps not working. I kept adjusting the wrong variable. More sleep, better sleep. Earlier bedtime, different sleep schedule, 3 months of this. The sleep got better. The waking up empty didn't move. It took longer than I'd like to admit before I stopped asking what was wrong with my nights and started asking what was actually being drained. What is being drained, if you are this kind of person, is not a physical resource. It is not ATP. It is not cortisol in some dramatic clinical sense. It is something more specific and harder to name, something closer to the capacity to process emotional experience. And unlike your body, which largely restores itself during sleep, this particular capacity is not primarily depleted by being awake. It is depleted by a specific kind of attention, by a specific kind of contact, by other people's emotional states, and what you do with them automatically. Depletion, as a word, is more precise than exhaustion. Exhaustion implies you ran too far. Depletion implies something went somewhere. The distinction matters because if something went somewhere, you can start asking where. You can start tracing the direction. And the direction, for people like you, is almost always outward. There is a further distinction that will matter in later chapters, but deserves a mention here. The difference between depletion that comes from difficult interactions and depletion that comes from ordinary ones. Most frameworks about emotional exhaustion focus on the hard cases, the difficult colleague, the demanding family member, the person who takes and never gives. Those interactions are depleting, yes, but they are not the primary source for high empathy people. The primary source is the constant low-level monitoring. The background hum, the emotional weather reading that happens in every interaction, not just the hard ones. The way you walk into a room and know within seconds who is tense, who is fragile, who is holding something they haven't said, and the way you immediately, without deciding to, orient toward that information. That's not a gift with a shadow side. That is a system running continuously in the background of your life. And continuous systems, even quiet ones, draw power. The woman in the parking garage is not avoiding the day. She is not anxious. She is not struggling in any visible way. She is simply doing, in 11 minutes of silence, the only thing that actually helps. Being somewhere that makes no emotional demand on her. Somewhere the antenna, briefly, has nothing to pick up. The day will start, and the antenna will go back up. She knows this. She doesn't think of it in those terms. She thinks of it as getting ready. She is not tired. She is borrowed. Lent out to everyone else's experience hour by hour, so gradually and so completely that she has almost forgotten there was something to borrow from in the first place. Chapter 2. The empathy tax. Marcus gets to the meeting 3 minutes early. His manager is already there, arranging papers in the particular way she arranges papers when something is about to be difficult. She hasn't said a word. She hasn't looked up. Marcus sits down, opens his laptop, and spends the next 4 minutes performing the external behavior of a person reviewing notes while internally running a full audit of what might be wrong, whose fault it might be, whether it involves him, and how the next hour is most likely going to go. The meeting is about a scheduling change. Nothing else. It takes 12 minutes. His manager is slightly distracted because she has a dentist appointment at noon and doesn't love dentists. Marcus leaves the meeting having spent approximately 45 minutes of mental and emotional energy on a 12-minute scheduling conversation. The discrepancy does not register. This is just how meetings feel to him. This is just how he is. He will be inexplicably drained by 2 p.m. and will attribute it to not sleeping well. Here's a thing that doesn't get said clearly enough. Empathy is not free. This is not a criticism. It is an accounting observation. Every time your nervous system reads another person's emotional state, really reads it, the way high empathy people do, not as an intellectual inference, but as something closer to a physical reception, there is a cost. Small, usually, barely perceptible, but it runs on every transaction, every room, every face you look at long enough to actually see. Most people get to move through social environments the way you move through a grocery store. You notice things. You register other people as present. You might have a brief exchange at the checkout. You leave and your emotional state is largely what it was when you arrived. Minor adjustments, ambient contact, nothing that required real expenditure. This is not your experience. Your experience is closer to walking through that grocery store and being unable to not notice that the woman by the produce section is holding it together by a thread, and that the teenager at the self-checkout is embarrassed about something, and that the man in line behind you is carrying a specific kind of tired that is not about the grocery run, and then, automatically, without choosing to, recalibrating your own energy in relation to each of them. Not intervening. Not even acknowledging it outwardly, just absorbing the frequency and doing something with it internally. You paid a tax on every one of those transactions. You don't have a receipt. The economic framing is deliberate because it captures something the psychological language misses. When people describe empathy as a gift, or as a burden, or as a double-edged sword, all of which are true, they are describing its nature. They are not describing its structure. The structure is financial. There is an input and an output and a ledger, and the ledger is almost never balanced at the end of the day. for people who experience empathy as involuntary reception rather than chosen response. The tax has several features worth understanding. The first is that it is automatic. You do not decide to read the room gets read. By the time you're aware of having registered someone's emotional state, the registration already happened and the processing has begun. There is no window in which you could have chosen not to pick it up. This is important because it means that suggestions like "just don't take it on" are, for people with this particular nervous system, roughly equivalent to suggesting you just don't hear loud noises. The advice is well-intentioned. The mechanism it's aimed at doesn't have an off switch. The second feature is compounding. A single emotionally loaded interaction is manageable. 2 is manageable. The problem is that for people whose empathy runs this way, essentially all interactions carry some emotional load. Not equally, not dramatically, but the tax applies. And taxes that apply to every transaction compound fast. By midday, you have paid on a dozen interactions. By evening, the bill is significant. By the end of a week in which nothing particularly terrible happened, you are carrying a deficit that sleep will partially address, and that will be waiting again, in some form, by Tuesday. The third feature, and this is the one that makes the whole structure so hard to see, is that the tax is invisible to the people around you. They are not taking anything from you. They are simply being people with emotional states in your vicinity. They didn't ask you to process their anxiety or absorb their tension or quietly recalibrate around their mood. You did that on your own. Without being asked, without being noticed. Entirely without compensation, because there was no transaction visible enough to compensate. I watched a colleague, someone I'd worked alongside for 2 years, walk into a project debrief where one of the senior leads was visibly, wordlessly unhappy about something. My colleague read it in approximately 3 seconds. I know this because I watched her body change. Something small in her shoulders, a micro-adjustment in how she was holding herself, before anyone had spoken, before the meeting had started. The tax collected before the interaction even began. She left that meeting tired in a way she couldn't account for. The meeting had gone fine. Nothing bad happened. There was no conflict, no difficult feedback, no emotional labor in any obvious sense. Just a room with a person in it who was carrying something. And her nervous system, doing what it always did, had oriented toward that and spent itself processing it. She said afterward she thought she was coming down with something. She was not coming down with something. There is a version of this that feels like caring, that feels like being attuned, like being present, like being the kind of person who actually pays attention in a world full of people who don't. And it is those things, genuinely. High empathy people are better at reading social situations, more responsive to others' needs, more likely to notice when something is wrong before it becomes a crisis. These are not small things. The world runs better with people like this in it, but the cost structure doesn't care about the upside. The ledger does not give you credit for the social good your empathy produces. It simply records the outflow. And the outflow, for most people who experience empathy this way, has been running since childhood, since before they had the language for it, since before they understood that other people were not also doing this, that the grocery store was, for most people, just a grocery store. That realization tends to arrive late and quietly, and with a specific kind of grief attached to it. The grief of understanding, retroactively, how much of what you spent was never actually yours to pay. Marcus will leave work this evening convinced he needs an earlier bedtime. He will be partly right. He will be missing the part where 45 minutes of preemptive emotional expenditure on a 12-minute meeting is not a sleep problem. It is a tax problem. And the tax rate is not set by his schedule. It is set by what his nervous system does by default in every room before the room has asked for anything at all. Something taken before you knew you had it to give. That is not exhaustion. That is collection. And it has been happening quietly on every transaction for longer than you've been keeping track. You're still here. 2 chapters in, that's not nothing. Most people who clicked this video moved on before they got uncomfortable. You didn't. Which means something in here is hitting close enough to stay. If that's the case, subscribe. Not because this channel needs it, because the next time you want this kind of thinking, you'll want to find it without looking for it. That's all. Back to the part that actually matters. Chapter 3, The Responsible One. Diane's phone rings at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. It's her brother. He's not in crisis. Nothing is on fire. No one is hurt. He just needs to talk through something that's been bothering him at work. She listens for 40 minutes. She asks the right questions. She helps him find the frame that makes the situation feel manageable. He hangs up lighter. She lies in the dark, wide awake, running the conversation back through her head, checking whether she said the right things, wondering if he's actually okay or just okay for tonight, making a mental note to text him in the morning. She will not sleep well. She will not mention the call to anyone. She will text him in the morning. Her brother will not think about the conversation again until she texts. This is not resentment. This is not a complaint. This is just the specific asymmetry that lives inside the life of the person everyone calls. At some point, early usually, and without any formal announcement, certain people get designated, not out loud, not deliberately. It happens through a series of small demonstrations. You handled that well. You always know what to say. I knew you'd understand. The designations accumulate. The role solidifies. And one day you are, without having applied for it, the person in your family, your friendships, your workplace, your neighborhood, the one who holds things together, the responsible one. The word responsible is doing significant work here, and it's worth slowing down on it. There is a version of responsibility that is clean and bounded. You are responsible for the outcomes of your own choices. You are responsible for the commitments you make and whether you keep them. This is the version most people mean when they use the word. It is a reasonable thing to be. It asks something of you and then stops asking. That is not the version the responsible one is carrying. The version they're carrying is ambient, untethered from specific asks. It is not I am responsible for this task. It is I am responsible for how everyone in this situation feels about this task. It is not I will help if someone needs it. It is I need to make sure no one needs it. And if they do, I need to provide it before they have to ask. And if I don't, I have failed at something. And the failure is mine. This is a fundamentally different orientation toward other people. And it is exhausting in a way that being busy is not, because busyness ends. The workday stops. The project finishes. The obligation closes. But the ambient responsibility for everyone's emotional state doesn't have office hours. It runs on weekends. It runs on vacation. It runs at 11 p.m. on a Thursday when a phone rings and a voice on the other end says, "I just need to talk." The question worth asking is how this happens. How does a person end up structurally responsible for everyone's feelings without being asked, without signing anything, without any moment where they could have clearly said no? The answer involves something that happened before adulthood, in most cases. In families where emotional needs were unpredictable, or where one parent's mood set the temperature for the entire household, or where being attuned to other people's states was not just natural, but functionally necessary. In those environments, a child with high empathic capacity learns something that feels like a survival skill. If I can read the room early enough, I can manage it. If I can anticipate what's needed, I can prevent the difficult thing from happening. If I stay responsible for the emotional climate, things stay okay. This is intelligent. In that context, it works. The problem is that it doesn't stay in that context. It moves with you into friendships where no one is threatening, into workplaces where no one needs managing, into relationships where the other person is a perfectly functional adult who is entirely capable of handling their own emotional experience. But you are running the same software anyway, because the software doesn't know the threat level has changed. It only knows its job. I understood this distinction intellectually for years before I felt it. The difference between being genuinely helpful and being someone who cannot tolerate the particular discomfort of an unmet need nearby. They look identical from the outside. They feel nearly identical from the inside. The gap between them is a question. Am I helping because I want to, or because I cannot locate a version of myself that isn't helping? I still don't always know which one is operating. What makes the responsible one's role so structurally durable is that it is reinforced continuously from both directions. From outside, people keep calling, keep relying, keep confirming that you are the person for this. And from inside, the discomfort of not responding is immediate and real. Someone near you is struggling, and you are not fixing it, and something in you registers that as a problem. Your problem. One you need to solve. The guilt is the mechanism, not dramatic guilt. Not the guilt that announces itself, the quiet kind, the background hum of a person who has linked their own sense of adequacy to the emotional well-being of everyone in their radius. That linkage is the thing. Everything else follows from it, because once your adequacy is linked to everyone else's okayness, the math becomes impossible. There will always be someone not okay. There will always be a need unmet, a mood unmanaged, a person who needed something and didn't get it. And every single one of those instances will register, briefly, quietly, but register, as a small failure. You are not burning through your emotional reserves because your life is hard. You are burning through them because you are grading yourself, constantly and unconsciously, against a standard that cannot be met. A perfect score would require everyone around you to always be okay. No one has ever achieved this. You try anyway. Nobody made Diane the responsible one. There was no meeting, no appointment. She simply responded, early and consistently and well, and the role took shape around her responses the way water takes the shape of whatever contains it. She became the container. The shape of the container is not her fault, but she is the one living inside it. And every night she lies awake checking her work, running the audit, making the mental note. Not because anyone asked her to. Because the job doesn't clock out. Because the responsible one never fully handed in a resignation letter. Because no one ever told her she was allowed to write one. She applied for this job so quietly that everyone assumed it was assigned. She may have assumed that too. Chapter 4. The room you haven't entered yet. Joel gets an email on Wednesday afternoon. His manager wants to meet Friday at 10. No agenda. Just, can we find time to connect this week? Joel spends Wednesday evening quietly convinced he is about to be fired. Not in a panicked, visible way. In the way of a person who has learned to process threat privately and thoroughly. He runs the scenarios, He reviews recent work. He tries to remember if anything landed wrong, if any conversation carried a subtext he missed, if there was a moment 2 weeks ago that felt fine at the time but maybe wasn't. He does not tell his partner what he's doing. He tells his partner he's a little distracted. Thursday, he is functional and pleasant and gets things done. Inside, the simulation is still running. Friday, the meeting is 20 minutes. His manager wants to flag Joel early for a stretch assignment. She is visibly pleased to deliver this. Joel receives it well. He thanks her and means it. He drives back to his desk, feeling not elated, which would be the reasonable response, but emptied. Like something in him ran a very long way to arrive at a destination that turned out to be 2 blocks from where he started. He will be useless for most of Friday afternoon. He will tell himself he's just relieved. He is not relieved. He is depleted. The distance between those two things is the subject of this chapter. The standard account of emotional labor focuses on the interaction, the difficult conversation, the tense meeting, the person who needs managing, the moment where you hold yourself together while someone else comes apart. These are real. They cost real things. This is not a dispute, but the standard account misses where the spending actually begins. It begins before, long before. In the car on the way there, in the hallway outside the room, in the 48 hours between receiving an ambiguous email and sitting down for the meeting it announced. The emotional labor of a high empathy, high responsibility person is not event-driven. It is anticipatory. It runs on futures that haven't arrived yet, on interactions that are scheduled but not yet real, on scenarios the nervous system is rehearsing in case they're needed. This is the thing that doesn't make it onto anyone's list of reasons they might be tired. You didn't have a hard day. You had a fine day, technically. But you spent it pre-processing 3 conversations that were going to require something of you, running contingencies on 2 situations that might go sideways, and emotionally preparing for a meeting that turned out to be good news. The preparation cost the same as the event. In some cases, more. Think about what that means across a week, across a month. The actual difficult interactions are finite. There are only so many genuinely hard conversations, so many tense meetings, so many moments of real emotional demand. But the anticipatory labor, the pre-processing, the scenario running, the quiet preparation for how you will hold yourself and manage the room and respond to what might happen, that runs on almost everything. On the meeting that might be hard, on the email that might mean something, on the silence from a friend who usually responds faster. High empathy people are, almost without exception, also high anticipators. The same nervous system that reads emotional states in real time also projects forward, runs simulations of likely futures and pre-experiences them. Not as a choice, not as pessimism, as preparation. As the thing that made you good at navigating difficult situations. You'd already been there once, in your head, before you arrived in person. The cost of this showed up for me in a canceled meeting. Someone I'd been dreading a conversation with, legitimate reasons, real tension, not my imagination, canceled the day before. I noticed, to my confusion, that I felt almost as drained as I would have if the conversation had actually happened. The preparation had been thorough. The emotional pre-living had been complete. The fact that the event itself didn't materialize did not issue a refund. That cancellation taught me something about where the money was actually going. There is a psychological term, anticipatory anxiety, but it doesn't quite cover this because anxiety implies distress, and what high empathy people do is not always distressing. Sometimes it doesn't feel like anything at all. It feels like thinking. It feels like being prepared. It feels like the responsible approach to a situation that requires care. The reframe that matters is this. It is not thinking. It is emotional pre-living. And emotional pre-living is experiential. It uses the same resources as the real thing. Your nervous system, running a simulation of a difficult conversation, is not in standby mode. It is active. It is spending. It is treating the rehearsed event as something close enough to real to warrant a full physiological and emotional response. This is why people who are very good at handling difficult situations are often more drained by them than people who are less good. The person who walks into the hard meeting unprepared has one experience of it: the meeting itself. The person who has been preparing for 3 days has had the meeting 4 times before it starts. Their performance on the day is better. Their energy reserves afterward are not. Competence at emotional navigation is, in this specific sense, a tax on itself. And the particular cruelty of anticipatory labor is that it is often invisible even to the person doing it. Joel did not think of Wednesday evening as work. He thought of it as being a little preoccupied. He did not register Thursday's background hum as expenditure. He registered it as mild stress, which he managed, which is what he always does. The fact that managing it cost something did not make the ledger. The ledger only records things that feel like events. Most of the spending doesn't feel like events. It feels like being a thoughtful person who takes things seriously and tries to be prepared, which is what you are. The problem is that being that person has a running cost, that thoughtful, serious, prepared people are systematically the least likely to notice, because noticing it would require treating their own internal experience as information worth paying attention to. And they are busy paying attention to everyone else's. Joel's Friday afternoon is gone. Not to the meeting, which was fine. To the 48 hours of pre-meeting that the meeting never knew it had. To the rooms he walked through in his head that he never actually entered. To the conversations he prepared for that didn't happen the way he'd rehearsed, or didn't happen at all. The energy spent on rooms that stayed empty. That is not a small thing. Across a life lived this way, across years of preparing for the difficult thing that sometimes comes and sometimes doesn't, across the accumulated weight of all the anticipatory labor that left no visible trace. It is, in fact, quite a large thing. It just never looked like anything from the outside. And because it never looked like anything, nobody counted it, including you. Chapter 5. Where caring becomes compulsion. There is a dinner party. 8 people, good food, the kind of evening that by any measure is going fine. Halfway through the main course, Rachel notices that her friend Claire has gone slightly quiet. Not obviously quiet. Not the kind of quiet anyone else would register. Just 2 degrees less present than she was 20 minutes ago. A small withdrawal, barely perceptible. Rachel notices it in the way you notice a change in air pressure. Not a thought yet, just a registration. For the next hour, while the conversation moves around the table and the wine gets poured, and 2 people get into a friendly argument about something Rachel will not later remember, a portion of Rachel's attention, not all of it, she is still present, still laughing in the right places, is trained on Claire. Watching for confirmation or resolution. Quietly checking. Is she okay now? Was it something? Did it pass? Claire is fine. Claire had a brief moment of missing her mother, who died 2 years ago, triggered by a song that came on in the background. It lasted about 4 minutes. Claire moved through it, as she has learned to do, and returned to the evening. Rachel will not fully return to the evening. She will carry the small, unresolved question of Claire's quietness all the way home. She will text Claire the next day, a friendly, unrelated text, because she is not going to say, "I noticed you seemed slightly distant for 4 minutes at dinner," and she will read Claire's response for tone. Claire's response will be warm and normal, and will tell Rachel nothing she needs to know because there is nothing to know. Rachel will feel something close to relief. And then the evening will fade, and she will not think about it again. But she will be tired on Sunday in a way she cannot account for. It was just a dinner party. It was a nice time. The antenna doesn't know the difference between a nice time and a crisis. It just stays up. There is a line, not marked, not announced, between caring about someone and being unable to tolerate the unresolved uncertainty of their emotional state. On one side of that line is compassion. On the other side is compulsion. And the crossing happens so gradually, so naturally, in such small increments, that it never presents itself as a choice. Most people who have crossed it don't know they have. They experience themselves as caring people, which they are. The caring is real. The problem is not the caring. The problem is that at some point the caring fused with something else, a need for resolution, a sensitivity to ambient distress, an inability to be at rest while someone nearby is not. And the fusion happened quietly, underground, while they were busy just being the kind of person they are. The psychological distinction is precise, even if the experience of it isn't. Caring about someone means their well-being matters to you. Compulsive absorption means their emotional state regulates yours. The first is a value. The second is a merger. And the merger is the mechanism that makes ordinary caring so expensive, because you are no longer simply feeling concern for another person. You are tying your own internal equilibrium to the resolution of their experience. When Claire's mood shifts, Rachel's nervous system registers it as a problem. Not consciously, not as a thought, as a state. Something unresolved has entered the environment, something that requires attention, and Rachel's system, without instruction, turns toward it. Not because Rachel decided to, but because this is what her system does. It resolves. It monitors. It will not fully stand down until the ambiguity is gone. This is not weakness. It is a very old, very efficient piece of wiring. The capacity to detect and respond to emotional distress in others is deeply human. It is the basis of attachment, of caregiving, of social cohesion. The problem is not that the wiring exists. The problem is that for some people, somewhere along the way, the threshold got set so low that the system triggers on almost everything. The alarm responds to weather changes, not just fires. And a person who is always monitoring for fires, even when there aren't any, never gets to stand down. Standing down for such a person doesn't feel like rest. It feels like negligence. I watched this happen to someone I knew well. A friend, I'll call her Nina, whose attunement to the people around her was genuinely extraordinary. She was the person who noticed things, who said the right thing at the right moment, who made people feel seen in a way that was not performance. It was real, and people felt it. And they came to her because of it. What I watched over a few years was the caring and the compulsion become indistinguishable. Not just to outside observers, to Nina. She could not tell, by the time I was paying attention, whether she was reaching toward a friend who needed support, or whether she was trying to resolve her own discomfort at being near someone whose distress was unaddressed. She experienced it all as caring. it all looked like caring. The cost structure was completely different. The caring costs what it costs. It is finite. You spend something, you feel the connection. There is a return. The compulsion has no return. It doesn't complete. It doesn't close. It generates more monitoring, more checking, more low-level vigilance. Because resolving one ambiguity doesn't turn the system off. It just makes the system available for the next one. The gradual nature of the crossing is what makes it so hard to see. It is not a dramatic shift. There is no moment where you stop being a caring person and become something else. There is just a slow migration. Caring, then caring plus monitoring. Then caring plus monitoring plus an internal unease when the monitoring doesn't resolve. Then a relationship between your own nervous system's regulation and the emotional states of the people around you that you did not design and cannot fully override. The line is somewhere in there. Exact location unknown. The crossing happened without you. What makes this particularly interesting, and by interesting I mean the kind of interesting you feel in your stomach, is that the compulsion wears the costume of virtue. It looks like attentiveness. It presents as care. It feels from the inside like being a good friend, a good partner, a good colleague. The exhaustion it generates gets misread as the natural cost of caring about people deeply. You are supposed to feel this way. The logic runs. This is what love costs. This is what it means to take relationships seriously. If you weren't tired, you probably wouldn't be doing it right. This is not correct. But it is extremely convincing if you are already the kind of person who equates emotional labor with moral seriousness. The line between caring and compulsion is not a moral distinction. Crossing it doesn't make you less good. It makes you less free, less able to be in a room with people you love and let their experience be their experience, separate from yours, landing in their life, not in your nervous system. Rachel's text to Claire will come from a real place. She does love Claire. The concern is genuine. What is also true is that the text is, in part, an attempt to close an ambiguous loop that her system opened at dinner and could not close itself. The caring and the compulsion are both present. They are not distinguishable by their surface appearance. The line vanished somewhere between the first glass of wine and the drive home. Quietly, on an ordinary evening, the way these things always go. Chapter 6. What you're carrying that isn't yours. It's a Tuesday morning. Soft start to the day. No early meetings, decent coffee, nothing yet on fire. By 10 o'clock, something is wrong. Not wrong. Just off. A low-grade heaviness that doesn't match the morning. A flatness that has no obvious cause. You review the day so far. Nothing happened. You slept fine. The coffee was good. You spend the rest of the morning slightly inside yourself, trying to locate the source. Mildly convinced you might be coming down with something, or that there's a thing you've forgotten that your subconscious is flagging, or that this is just one of those days. It is not one of those days. It is one of those mornings where you had breakfast with someone who was carrying something they didn't name, and you picked it up without knowing you were picking it up. And now it's yours. Not because they gave it to you, because you have never learned to let it stay with them. There's a taxonomy here worth naming. Not as a list to be checked off, but as a map. Because if you can see the specific shapes of what gets absorbed, you can start to recognize them in real time, rather than 3 hours later when you're trying to explain to yourself why Tuesday feels like Friday. The first category is unspoken tension, not conflict. Conflict is visible, at least. Tension is the thing in the room that everyone can feel and nobody is addressing. The particular quality of silence after something almost became an argument. The energy between two people who have agreed, without discussing it, to not discuss something. You walk into a room where this exists and your nervous system catalogs it immediately. Something is unresolved here, and something in you, the part that monitors, the part that cannot rest with ambient ambiguity, begins to orient toward it. You did not create the tension. It was there before you arrived. But it is in you now, vibrating at low frequency, asking to be resolved. The second category is ambient disappointment. Harder to detect than tension because it doesn't have an edge. It's the low-level dissatisfaction of someone who expected something different from their life and has made a kind of peace with not getting it. The peace that is actually just a managed acceptance, still present, still coloring everything they say. You spend an afternoon with someone like this and come away feeling strangely heavy without knowing why. You didn't discuss anything heavy, but you absorbed the frequency of a person for whom things did not quite work out, and that frequency lives in you now for a while, until it fades. The third category is unexpressed anger. This one is the most physically present. You can feel it in a room the way you can feel a change in temperature. Someone is angry and is not saying so. Maybe they can't. Maybe the context doesn't allow it. Maybe they are, themselves. A person who has learned to manage their emotional expression to the point where the anger has gone somewhere internal and only leaks at the edges. You pick this up and, depending on your wiring, you either absorb it as a vague unease, or you begin, without deciding to, trying to soften the environment around it, making small adjustments, being slightly warmer than the situation requires, filling the space with enough ease that the unexpressed thing has less room to expand. This is skilled work. It also wasn't yours to do. The fourth category, and this is the one that catches people most off guard, is other people's anxiety about things that have nothing to do with you. Their worry about money, about a relationship, about a decision pending. Not about you, not directed at you, just present, like a smell in a room, something the air is carrying. You absorb it anyway. And because it has no specific content that belongs to your life, you often can't locate it. It just shows up as a low hum of unease, a slight tensing, a background feeling that something might be off. When the only thing off is that you've been near someone who is worried, and your system did what it always does with the signals it picks up. 3 hours into a bad day, I'll sometimes stop and trace it back. When did this start? What was the first thing I felt this morning? And more often than I'd like to admit, the answer is that the first feeling of the day wasn't mine. It arrived with someone else, in a tone of voice, in the quality of a silence, in the way a good morning landed slightly flat. And I absorbed it before I had a full sentence together. The awareness came hours later. The absorption was faster than the thought. The reason these categories matter is not so that you can defend against them. We will get to why defense isn't quite the right frame. But because the first step in not being unconsciously governed by something is being able to see its shape. What high empathy people carry is not abstract emotional contamination. It has specific textures, specific signatures. The unspoken tension feels different from the ambient disappointment feels different from the unexpressed anger. They have different weights, different durations, different ways of lodging. Tension tends to be acute and relatively short-lived once the room changes. Disappointment lingers. Unexpressed anger can sit in you for days before you identify it, and longer before you can put it down. And here is the thing about putting it down, which is the advice everyone gives and almost no one explains usefully. You cannot put something down that you haven't first noticed you're holding. The entire problem with absorbed emotional material is that it arrives below the threshold of conscious registration. By the time you're aware of it, it has already integrated into your sense of how you feel today. It has become indistinguishable from your own emotional state. You are not carrying someone else's anxiety. You are anxious. You are not carrying someone else's disappointment. You are flat and heavy and not quite sure why. The distinction between what is yours and what you absorbed only becomes available if you develop the habit, and it is a habit, not a talent, of asking at any given moment of unexplained feeling, did this start here? Or did I bring this in? Most people never ask the question, not because they don't care, but because the assumption is so deeply automatic, my feelings are my feelings, that there is no prompt to question it. For people who absorb the way high empathy people absorb, that assumption is not always accurate. Some of what you are feeling right now is not yours. It arrived. It arrived without announcement, without your consent, through the normal channels of human contact. And it has been living in you, occupying space, drawing on your reserves, all while wearing the face of your own experience. This is not dramatic. It is just the ordinary operation of a particular kind of nervous system in a world full of people who are feeling things. The problem is, you packed their bags along with your own somewhere in the morning, and you didn't notice when you picked them up. You arrived at Tuesday evening carrying luggage that cleared no customs. You just found it in your hands when you stopped to look. Chapter 7. The person who never gets to not be okay. There is no scene to open with this time. No Marcus in a meeting, no Rachel at a dinner party. Just a person. You can put any face on this. It will probably be the right one. Lying awake at some unreasonable hour. Not catastrophizing. Not anxious in any clinical sense. Just quietly present with the specific weight of a life in which they are always the one who holds it. Not complaining. Not even particularly aware in this moment that there is anything to complain about. Just awake, just heavy, just here. That's the whole scene. That's all there is. There is a role that gets handed out in families, in friendships, in workplaces, and in relationships. And it goes by different names. The strong one, the stable one, the one who keeps it together. And what all those names share is that they describe a person whose function is structural. They are not a participant in the emotional life of the group. They are the architecture, the thing that holds the shape so other people can move around inside it. The role comes with real things. Respect, usually. Trust. The particular satisfaction of being genuinely useful to people you love. These are not nothing. They are real, and the person in the role feels them. And this is part of why the role persists, because it gives back something that looks, from certain angles, like enough. But here is what it also comes with, and what almost never gets named. The strong one does not get to be not okay. Not in any sustained way. Not in a way that requires the group to reorganize around them. They can have a bad day. They are human, and the people who love them are not monsters. And a bad day is permissible. But a bad week? A period of genuine struggle? A moment where they put down the load and say, I cannot hold this right now. Someone else needs to take it. This is, for the person who has been the structure, practically unthinkable. Not because anyone has explicitly forbidden it, because the architecture doesn't get to have needs of its own. Walls don't ask to be held up. This is not always imposed from outside. Often, usually, it is self-imposed. The person in the role has so thoroughly internalized the expectation that they are the stable one that they have lost access to the option of being otherwise. They don't suppress their own needs because others demand it. They suppress them because instability feels like failure. Because needing feels like a burden they are not willing to put on the people they love. Because they have been the person others came to for so long that they genuinely don't know how to be the person who goes to someone else. And so they don't. They hold it. They continue to hold it. They hold it on the days when it is heavy and on the days when it is heavier still. They hold it in the mornings when the deficit is already there before the day begins, and in the evenings when they have given out more than came in, and in the small hours of the night when there is no demand being made on them, but the holding has become so habitual that they cannot locate the part of themselves that exists outside of it. I made the call. Someone I was close to was in real pain, not crisis, but genuine distress, the kind that needed presence, not solutions. I showed up, fully. I stayed in it with them, held the space, did not flinch and did not fix. It was the right call. I believe that. Afterward, alone, I sat with what was left in me, which was not grief and not relief and not even tiredness in any familiar sense. It was vacancy, a specific blankness where something had been. I don't tell this as a lesson. There is no lesson here. I am telling it because vacancy is the right word, and I want you to know that I know what it feels like. What doesn't get examined, what almost never gets said out loud, is the specific loneliness of this position. The strong one is surrounded by people who love them. They are not isolated. They are, in many cases, the most socially connected person in their circle. They are known, valued, relied upon, and they are, at the same time, profoundly alone in their experience. Because the very role that keeps them connected to others requires them to be the container. And containers don't go inside other containers. There is no equivalent holding available. This is not a criticism of the people who rely on the strong one. They are not doing anything wrong. They are doing what the architecture allows. The strong one built the structure. The structure works. Everyone is behaving correctly within it. The problem is a design problem, not a character problem. But design problems have the same weight as any other kind. Think about what it means, practically. When you are exhausted, genuinely, deeply depleted, where do you go? If you are most people, you go toward the people you trust. The ones who have held you before, who know you well enough to give you what you need without you having to perform for it. You go somewhere that receives you. Now think about who you are in other people's emotional ecosystems. You are the somewhere. You are where they go. When you need to go somewhere, the architecture you have built and your role within it means that the somewhere is structurally, practically, by design, unavailable to you. Not because anyone would refuse, but because asking would require you to become, even briefly, someone other than the person you have been for everyone. And that crossing is, for the strong one, enormous. It feels like letting go of something essential. It feels like failure. It feels like a betrayal of the people who rely on you to be the structure, even though those people would almost certainly say that's not what they want. It doesn't matter what they would say. It matters what the nervous system believes. And the nervous system of the strong one has learned, deeply and over a long time, that their stability is not optional, that it is what they owe, that it is, in some fundamental way, what they are for. There is a particular kind of tired that comes not from overwork, but from the continuous, unrelieved task of being the person everyone else leans on while having nowhere equivalent to lean. It is not dramatic tired. It does not announce itself. It is the tired of a person who has been standing in the same position for a very long time, not because the position is painful, but because they have never been offered a turn to sit down, and have never asked for one, and have somewhere along the way stopped believing that sitting down was a thing available to them. The strong one does not need more sleep. They need something that the architecture of their life does not currently contain. A place to put the load. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just somewhere. Briefly. With someone who can bear it without it meaning that everything has changed. That place does not exist yet, for most of them. And they are too busy holding everything else together to build it. So they lie awake at some unreasonable hour, not catastrophizing, not anxious, just present with the weight. Just carrying it. The way they always do. The way they will again tomorrow. There is nothing else to say about this. There is no, however, no but, no turn toward the light. There is just this. The weight is real, the carrying is continuous, and the person doing it deserves to have that witnessed without being handed a solution they didn't ask for. So, witnessed. Chapter 8, Why Rest Doesn't Fix It. Thomas comes back from 10 days in Portugal. He has the tan, the photos, the slightly unfocused eyes of a person who has successfully decelerated. He slept 9 hours a night. He ate well. He walked along the water in the evenings and did not check his email, and felt, by day 4, something he had almost forgotten was available to him. A kind of spaciousness, an absence of the usual hum, a sense of being located in his own life rather than slightly above it, managing it. He lands on a Sunday. By Tuesday afternoon, sitting in a team meeting where a colleague is visibly frustrated about a resourcing decision, Thomas feels the familiar weight settle back into place like a key turning in a lock. Not gradually, not over days of re-entry. Fast. The weight knows exactly where it lives. He tells his wife that evening that he thinks he needs a longer vacation next time. 2 weeks instead of 1. Maybe 3. She nods. She has heard this before. He went for 2 weeks the year before last. The weight came back by Wednesday. Rest is real. This needs to be said clearly before anything else. Sleep is not optional. Genuine physical recovery is not a luxury. The body has requirements, and when they go unmet, the consequences are real and serious and compound in ways that eventually become medical. None of what follows is an argument against rest. Rest is necessary. It is just not sufficient. And for a specific kind of exhaustion, it addresses the wrong thing almost entirely. Here is the mechanism. What rest restores is capacity. Physical capacity, cognitive capacity, the basic metabolic resources that a body and brain require to function. Rest is a replenishment system, and it works. You put the depleted thing in the recovery environment, and it refills. This is the transaction rest is designed to complete. But the transaction assumes the depletion is caused by expenditure, by doing, by the output of energy across time. And for ordinary exhaustion, the kind that comes from overwork, from not enough sleep, from a period of high demand, this assumption is correct. You spent. Now you restore. The math closes. The exhaustion that rest doesn't fix is not caused by expenditure. It is caused by orientation, by the default position of a nervous system that is permanently extended outward, permanently receiving, permanently processing the emotional content of other people's experience. And that does not change its orientation because the calendar cleared. This is the thing. The mechanism is not in the schedule. It is not in the workload. It runs independent of both. A person whose nervous system is wired to scan, absorb, and process the emotional states of everyone in their vicinity will do exactly that on vacation. In Portugal, at 9 hours of sleep, on a walk along the water in the evening, Thomas felt the spaciousness by day 4 because the people around him on that trip, strangers largely, with no emotional claim on him, no history, no need he was responsible for, did not activate the mechanism. Not because the mechanism switched off, because the trigger wasn't present. Remove the familiar faces, the established roles, the people whose emotional states have been his implicit responsibility for years, and the system has nothing to orient toward. The quiet was real. It was also situational, which is why it lasted exactly as long as the situation did. I watched someone return from a proper holiday, 2 weeks, genuinely offline, visibly restored, and within 40 minutes of being back among their people, back in the familiar constellation of relationships and roles and emotional responsibilities, the specific quality of their presence changed. Not the tan, not the sleep. Something behind the eyes. A door that had been briefly open, closing again. Not because anything terrible had happened. Because the mechanism had found its material. It had come home. The cruel precision of this is worth sitting with. The rest worked. Thomas was genuinely restored in Portugal. The depletion was genuinely addressed. The depletion that rest is capable of addressing. He came back with more capacity than he left with. The problem is that increased capacity in a person with this orientation means increased ability to do the thing that depletes them. He came back with a fuller tank and immediately, within 48 hours, began the process of emptying it through the same mechanism that emptied it before he left. The vacation was not wasted. It just treated the symptom with real precision and left the cause entirely intact. This is not a criticism of Thomas, or of vacations, or of rest as a category. It is an observation about what rest is and is not equipped to reach. Rest operates on the output side of the equation. It restores what was spent. What it cannot do is alter what the nervous system does by default. The continuous, background, largely involuntary process of emotional absorption that runs regardless of how full or empty the tank is. To change that, you would need to intervene at the level of the mechanism, not the schedule, not the workload, not the amount of time spent in environments with lower emotional demand. The mechanism itself, the orientation, the default setting of a nervous system that has learned over years, and usually from a young age, that other people's emotional states are its business, its responsibility, its emergency. That is not something a vacation can reach. And this is why the person who does everything right, who rests, who reduces, who takes the advice seriously and follows it faithfully, comes back to exactly where they were within days. Not because they failed to rest properly, because they rested from the wrong thing. They rested their body. They rested their schedule. They did not, could not, without understanding what was actually running, rest the mechanism. The mechanism doesn't take days off. It works weekends. It comes on the vacation, quiet in the background, ready to find its material the moment the material returns. It knows where you keep the spare key. It has always known. You gave it 1 year ago in a different context, for what felt like very good reasons. You don't remember doing it. You came back from Portugal rested and ready, and the door was open before you set down your bag. Chapter 9. The difference that changes everything. 2 people sit with a friend who is going through something genuinely hard. A relationship ending. the specific grief of a thing you chose that turned out to be wrong. Their friend, call her Priya, is not in crisis. She is just in pain, and she needs company in it, not rescue from it. The first person sits with Priya and feels the sadness with her. It moves through them, real, present, recognized. They are genuinely there. Priya feels it. The quality of being truly witnessed by someone who is actually feeling something in response to your pain is unmistakable. And Priya feels it, and it helps. Afterward, the first person carries a residue, a gentle weight, the kind that comes from real contact with something real. It fades by evening. They feel, underneath it, something that is almost the opposite of depletion, a specific fullness that comes from genuine human connection. The second person sits with Priya and feels her sadness as an emergency, not consciously. But the pain in the room lands in them not as something to be present with, but as something to be resolved. They lean forward slightly. They ask questions aimed at finding the frame that will make it better. They offer the perspective that recontextualizes. They are working. The work is invisible, and they would not call it work. They would call it caring, and they are right that they care. But the orientation is corrective rather than connective. They are trying to fix what they are feeling by fixing what Priya is feeling. Priya is grateful. She also feels slightly managed. The second person leaves exhausted. They gave everything they had. They are not sure it was enough. They will check in tomorrow. The first person and the second person both love Priya. The difference between them is not in the quality of the caring. It is in the structure of it. One of them felt with, the other felt for. And that structural distinction, small, almost invisible, entirely consequential, is what determines whether genuine human connection restores you or hollows you out. The neurological distinction is real before it is philosophical. When you feel with someone, when you allow their emotional experience to land in you and resonate without immediately treating it as a problem requiring your intervention, something specific happens in the brain. The mirror neuron system activates. You experience a version of what they're feeling. There is contact. There is, in the neurological sense, a genuine meeting. And this meeting, when it happens cleanly, is not depleting. It is, in a specific and measurable way, connecting. The membrane between you and the other person is present. You are inside their experience enough to understand it. You are outside it enough to remain yourself. The membrane is everything. It is the thing that makes empathy sustainable. When you feel for someone, when their pain becomes your emergency, when their unresolved distress activates your own regulatory system, when you cannot be at rest until they are at rest, the membrane has dissolved. You are not resonating with their experience. You are inside it. There is no longer a clear distinction between what they're feeling and what you're responsible for resolving. Their emotional state has become, functionally, your emotional state. And managing your emotional state now requires managing theirs. This is the merger described in Chapter 5, seen now from the inside, from the level of the nervous system rather than the behavior. What makes it so hard to catch is that it feels like caring more. The second person with Priya feels more invested, more present, more urgently concerned. The intensity of the experience reads as the intensity of the love. If I'm this affected, it must mean I care deeply. And it does mean they care deeply. The caring is not the problem. The architecture of the caring is the problem. The absence of the membrane is the problem. I understood the distinction in theory for longer than I understood it in practice. There was a specific evening, someone close to me, real pain, nothing to fix, where I stayed with the discomfort of not intervening, sat in it, did not reach for the reframe, did not offer the perspective that would have helped them feel better, and not incidentally, helped me feel less helpless. I just stayed, present, feeling it with them rather than trying to process it for them. It felt wrong. It felt like withholding, like I had the tool and was refusing to use it. What I was withholding, I understood later, was not support. It was control. The intervention was never really for them. It was for the part of me that cannot tolerate sitting in unresolved pain without treating it as a problem I'm responsible for solving. It wasn't withholding. It was, for the first time in a long time, actually being present without an agenda. The practical question, and it is the right question, even if the answer is uncomfortable, is what determines which one you're doing. How do you know, in the middle of a real interaction with a person you genuinely love, whether you are feeling with them or feeling for them, whether the membrane is intact or dissolved? There is a test, imperfect but useful. Ask what you are trying to accomplish. If the answer is nothing, if you are there simply to be there, to witness, to let the experience be what it is without steering it toward resolution, the membrane is probably intact. You are present. You are connected. You are doing the thing that connection actually requires. If the answer involves fixing, resolving, reframing, making it better, if there is a goal, even a loving goal, ask whether the goal is for them or for you. Ask whether you could stay in the room with their unresolved pain indefinitely, without it costing you anything beyond the ordinary weight of caring about someone who is hurting. If the answer is no, if the unresolved pain is pulling at something in you, activating something, generating a low-grade urgency, then the membrane has thinned. You have moved from feeling with to feeling for. And the distinction matters enormously, not because feeling for is wrong, but because it is expensive in a way that feeling with is not. It costs because it turns someone else's experience into your problem. And your nervous system will work that problem until it is resolved, or until you are empty, whichever comes first. The membrane is thin. It is not dramatic. It is just the small structural difference between empathy that connects and empathy that consumes, between presence and merger, between caring and the kind of caring that leaves you staring at the ceiling at midnight, wondering if you said the right thing. Both feel like love. One of them also feels like drowning, very slowly, in water that isn't yours. The membrane is doing the only work that actually matters. Without it, all the caring in the world has no floor. Without it, you don't feel with people. You become them. And somewhere in that becoming, quiet, gradual, without announcement, you lose the thread back to yourself. That thread is not a luxury. It is the whole thing. Chapter 10. Who You Became. Somewhere in her mid-30s, Laura stopped being able to answer the question, what do you want with any real speed? Not in dramatic ways. She knew she wanted her kids to be okay. She knew she wanted her marriage to work. She knew she wanted to do her job well. Those answers came fast because they were all, in structure, answers about other people. Ask her what she wanted for herself, what she actually wanted, from her own life, in her own experience, with no reference to anyone else's needs or expectations. And something happened. Not blankness exactly, more like a lag, a buffering. As if the question were being routed to a part of the system that hadn't been used in a while and needed a moment to spin up. She was not an unself-aware person. She had done therapy, She knew her patterns. She could describe her childhood with real precision and trace the lines from there to here with the kind of clarity that makes therapists nod. She understood herself. She just didn't particularly know what she wanted. The understanding and the knowing had come apart somewhere, quietly, without her noticing when. Identity, for most people, is something that assembles gradually from the inside out. What I feel, what I notice I need, what pulls me, what repels me, what makes me feel like myself rather than like a version of myself performing for the situation. This interior data is the raw material. The identity is what gets built from it. For people who have spent years with their attention oriented outward, absorbing, monitoring, managing, responding to the emotional states of everyone in their vicinity, the interior data has been not suppressed exactly, but consistently deprioritized. Every time the choice was between attending to your own experience and attending to someone else's, you attended to someone else's. Not as a conscious sacrifice, just as the natural order of things, just as how you move through the world. The consequence, accumulated over years, is that the interior data gets thin. Not gone. Thin. The signal that tells you what you want, what you need, what you actually feel independent of what everyone else is feeling. That signal is still there. It is just quiet in a way that other signals are not. It has learned over time that it will not be attended to promptly, and signals that go unattended learn to wait. Some of them learn to stop. This is not a dramatic loss. It doesn't feel like loss at all most of the time. It feels like being a practical person, a person who deals with what's in front of them, a person who has real responsibilities and doesn't have the luxury of excessive introspection. The self-deprioritization gets framed as maturity, as groundedness, as not being self-indulgent. It is very effectively disguised as a virtue. It is also, quietly, a disappearance. What makes this particular disappearance so durable is that the role which replaced the self is genuinely functional. The emotionally responsible person, the one who reads the room, manages the temperature, absorbs what needs absorbing, and holds what needs holding, is not playing pretend. They are good at this. The role produces real results. People feel genuinely supported, genuinely seen, genuinely helped. The feedback is continuous and positive. You are doing this well. Keep doing this. And so you keep doing it. And the doing of it, sustained over years, stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The role calcifies. The architecture sets. What was once a behavior becomes an identity. What was once a choice, even if it never quite felt like one, becomes the only available self. I realized this late. There was a moment, not a dramatic one, just an ordinary Tuesday with nothing particularly at stake, where I understood that I was protecting the role rather than protecting myself. That the thing I was most afraid of losing was not a relationship or a circumstance, but a way of being that had become so central to how I understood myself, that relinquishing it felt like self-destruction rather than self-recovery. The role and the self had become the same object. Reaching for one meant reaching for the other. I could not find the seam. The psychological term for this is identity fusion. When a role or relational function becomes so integrated into the self-concept that it can no longer be distinguished from the core identity. But the term makes it sound more exotic than it is. It is just the ordinary result of doing the same thing in the same orientation for long enough that the thing stops feeling like a thing you do and starts feeling like a thing you are. And here is what makes it genuinely hard to undo. Not impossible, but hard. Giving up the role doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like loss, not loss of something bad, loss of something that has, whatever its costs, also given you something real. The role came with meaning, with purpose, with the specific, legitimate satisfaction of being someone people could count on, someone whose presence made things better, someone who mattered in a tangible and immediate way to the people they loved. These are not small things. They are genuinely good things. The fact that they came packaged with an exhausting and invisible cost does not make them less real. This is why the simple advice, just stop being responsible for everyone's feelings, is approximately as useful as telling someone to just stop breathing through the left side of their nose. The instruction makes sense from outside. From inside, the mechanism it's aimed at is not experienced as optional. It is experienced as self. What would it mean for Laura to stop monitoring? To walk into a room and simply not scan it? To sit with a friend in pain and not treat the pain as something requiring her intervention? These are not presented here as achievements she should pursue. They are presented as what the suggestion actually asks of her, which is not a behavioral adjustment, but a fundamental reorganization of who she understands herself to be. That is not a small ask. The adaptation was intelligent once, in whatever context first required it, and for most people with this pattern, the context was early and the stakes were real. The role of the emotionally responsible one was not a mistake. It was a solution. A highly effective solution to a specific problem. A child who learned to read the room and manage the temperature and keep the peace was a child doing something genuinely useful in an environment that genuinely required it. The problem is not that the solution was wrong. The problem is that solutions don't automatically expire when the problem does. They persist. They generalize. They follow you into environments where the original problem no longer exists, and they apply themselves anyway, because they do not know that the threat level changed. They only know their job. Laura's job, the one she never officially accepted and cannot officially resign from, is to make sure everyone is okay. She has been doing it since she was young enough that it simply became the water she swims in. She does not experience it as a role. She experiences it as reality. Understanding that is not the same as being free of it, but it is the beginning of something. Not recovery, exactly. Not transformation. Something quieter and more honest than either of those words. The beginning of being able to see the seam between the role and the self, between what you became and what you are. They were never the same thing. You just couldn't find the line for a very long time. The loyalty to the mechanism was never loyalty to yourself. It just wore that face for long enough that the faces became hard to tell apart. Chapter 11. The Return. Daniel asks himself what he wants for dinner and draws a blank. Not a polite blank. Not the social blank of someone deferring to another person's preference. A genuine blank. He is alone in his kitchen on a Thursday evening with no one to consider. No preference to navigate around. No mood to read and accommodate. It is just him and the refrigerator and a question that should take 4 seconds and is instead taking considerably longer. He stands there for a moment that becomes slightly uncomfortable, and what he feels, underneath the mild absurdity of being stymied by a dinner decision, is something he cannot quite name. Not quite confusion. Something closer to the sensation of reaching for a familiar object in the dark and finding the shelf empty. The object is there. It has always been there. He just hasn't reached for it in a while. And the specific muscles involved in the reaching have, through extended disuse, become unreliable. He ends up eating leftover rice and feeling vaguely unsettled in a way that has nothing to do with the rice. The return of your own emotional life does not feel like liberation. This needs to be said first, before anything else. Because the way this moment gets described, in the literature, in the discourse, in the general cultural narrative around self-discovery and inner work, tends toward the cinematic. A turning point, a breakthrough, the feeling of coming home to yourself after a long absence. That is not what it feels like. What it feels like, initially, is disorientation, a specific strangeness. The interior landscape, when you first turn the antenna inward after years of having it pointed exclusively out, does not present itself as a rich and waiting territory. It presents as unfamiliar, slightly too quiet, full of signals you don't immediately know how to read because you have not been practicing reading them. Your own feelings, when you first attend to them directly, may seem smaller than you expected, or stranger, or less articulate. You may find that you cannot immediately tell the difference between what you actually want and what you think you should want, between what you actually feel and what the situation would reasonably call for. The distinction has been blurred for long enough that it requires reconstruction. This is not failure. This is just what happens when any system has been running in one direction for a long time and is asked to run in another. The selfish feeling is real, and it deserves to be named directly. When you first begin to attend to your own emotional experience, to treat your own interior state as information worth prioritizing, it feels like taking something, like reallocating a resource that was previously directed outward and redirecting it inward. And because you are, almost certainly, a person who has organized a significant portion of your identity around being useful to others, that reallocation feels like a withdrawal, like a reduction in what you're offering, like becoming, in some measurable and uncomfortable sense, less. This feeling is not evidence that the reallocation is wrong. It is evidence of how thoroughly the outward orientation has been internalized, so thoroughly that turning toward yourself registers as turning away from everyone else. As if the caring were a fixed resource with a zero-sum distribution, and any of it that lands on you is automatically subtracted from someone else. The caring is not a fixed resource. But try telling that to a nervous system that has been operating as though it were for most of a lifetime. The selfish feeling will pass. Not immediately, not on a schedule, but it is a transitional feeling, not a permanent condition. It is the feeling of a reorientation that hasn't yet resolved into a new equilibrium. It is discomfort in the right direction. The question to hold during it, not to answer, just to hold, is this: what does it mean that attending to your own experience feels like a moral violation? What does it say about the operating system you've been running that your own interior life requires justification before it qualifies for your attention? Hold the question. Don't rush the answer. What becomes available when the antenna turns inward is not initially dramatic. It is not a flood of suppressed emotion or a sudden clarity about who you really are underneath all the caring. It is quieter than that, more granular. It is noticing, maybe for the first time in a while, that you are tired before you become depleted. That there is a signal, small, early, entirely your own, that exists before the empty. You have been missing this signal for years because your attention was elsewhere. The signal was always there. You were just reliably looking in a different direction when it arrived. It is noticing what you actually find interesting, separate from what other people find interesting, that you have absorbed and made your own. Noticing what you want to do on a Thursday evening, in a kitchen, alone, before the accommodation reflex kicks in and replaces the answer with something more comfortable and less true. It is, in very small ways, beginning to distinguish between your feelings and the feelings you picked up from the room, between the mood you arrived with and the mood you acquired. The gap between them is often small. Sometimes it is not small at all. Either way, the capacity to ask the question, "Did this start here?" is the beginning of something that was not available before. I watched someone notice this for the first time. Not a realization, nothing so cinematic as that. Just a moment of visible confusion at a dinner when someone asked what she'd been enjoying lately. She started to answer and stopped. Started again. There was something happening in her face that was not distress. More like the expression of someone who has just found a door they didn't know was there and is not yet sure what's on the other side. She said finally, "I actually don't know. I'd have to think about it." She said it like an admission. It wasn't. It was the first honest answer to that question she'd given in years. The previous answers had all been fluent and warm and had described, on reflection, things that other people in her life enjoyed that she had been present for. This one was hers. The not knowing was hers. That was the difference. The return is not a destination. It does not resolve into a new stable state where you are permanently reoriented and fully in possession of your own interior life. That is not how this works. The antenna will continue to go outward. The absorption will continue to happen. The mechanism does not retire. What changes is the accompaniment. There begins to be, alongside the outward orientation, a small but growing presence of the inward one. A thread. Not constant, not reliable yet, but present. A faint signal from the direction of yourself, occasionally strong enough to register above the noise of everything else. The thread back to yourself is not a metaphor. It is something you can actually feel once you've felt it once. Once you know what you're looking for. The first feeling that is recognizably, unmistakably yours, not absorbed, not performed, not shaped by what the room required, lands differently than the others. It is smaller, usually, less dramatic than what you've been carrying on behalf of everyone else. It does not announce itself. It just sits there quietly, being only yours. And that, the smallness of it, the quietness, the way it belongs to no one else and requires nothing from anyone, feels strange and correct in a way that is genuinely hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. Strange because you are out of practice. Correct because you have always known, somewhere underneath everything, what your own experience feels like when it's actually yours. The shelf wasn't empty. You just hadn't reached for it in a long time. Chapter 12, What Actually Changes. 6 months after the conversation that started something shifting in her. Not a dramatic conversation, not a therapeutic breakthrough, just a moment where something was named and she recognized it. Maya notices a thing that would not make a good story. She is in a meeting. A colleague is visibly tense about a deadline. Maya registers it. The antenna goes up. The familiar orientation begins. The small internal movement toward managing the atmospheric pressure in the room. And then, not dramatically, not as an act of will, not with any sense of triumph, she notices that she is doing it. That is the entire event. She noticed. She does not stop doing it. The meeting continues. She is pleasant and professional, and still, in some background way, attuned to her colleague's tension. But there is now a small new thing, a part of her that is watching the process happen. A witness, not controlling, just present, just aware. She drives home and does not think about it again. This is what change looks like, not liberation. A witness. It would be satisfying to report that understanding the mechanism makes it stop, that the clarity earned across these chapters produces a transformation. The antenna retracts, the absorption ceases, the exhaustion lifts. The person formerly responsible for everyone's feelings discovers the clean, spacious experience of only being responsible for their own. This does not happen, or it does not happen the way that sentence suggests. Completely, irreversibly, with a before and after that are clearly distinguishable. What happens is more modest and, in the end, more real. The mechanism continues. The scanning still happens. The absorption still happens. The nervous system that learned, early and thoroughly, to treat other people's emotional states as its business does not unlearn this because you have read a book about it, or attended therapy, or had a conversation that named it clearly. The wiring is old. It is structural. It does not dissolve on contact with insight. But insight does something. Not to the mechanism, to the relationship with the mechanism. There is a difference, and this difference is the entire point of this chapter. So hold on to it. Between a process that runs you and a process that runs in you while you watch it. Between being operated by a mechanism you cannot see and being operated by a mechanism you can see and recognize, and occasionally, in small ways, choose a different response to. The mechanism does not change. The witness changes everything. What the witness makes available is specific. Not general, not transformative in any sweeping sense. Specific. It makes available the half-second. Before understanding, there was no gap between the trigger and the response. Someone in the room is tense, and you are already orienting, already absorbing, already running the process that will metabolize their tension into your own internal weather. The whole sequence happened below the threshold of awareness. It could not be interrupted because it could not be seen. The witness does not stop the sequence, but it sees it starting. And in seeing it starting, it creates, not always, not reliably, not on demand, but sometimes, a small gap. Half a second. A moment between the trigger and the full absorption where something like a choice becomes available. Not the choice to not feel, not the choice to disengage from human contact or stop caring or become a person with less empathy. Those are not on offer and they are not desirable. The choice is smaller and more honest than that. It is the choice to notice. To say internally with no drama, there it is. The mechanism is running. I can feel it starting. And from that noticing occasionally, to do something slightly different than the default. To stay with the discomfort of not immediately absorbing. To let the other person's tension be theirs for a moment longer. To remain briefly in the space before the merger. Sometimes this works. Sometimes the absorption happens anyway. Both are fine. The witness is not there to prevent the mechanism. It is there to know about it. I still absorb. I feel it before I understand it. I am in a room with someone who is carrying something, and my system orients before I have a conscious thought about it. The absorption is faster than the awareness. It has always been faster. I do not expect this to change. What has changed is a half second that was not there before. A brief, imperfect, sometimes absent recognition that something is happening and that I am watching it happen. That is not a cure. I am not going to pretend it is. It is also not nothing. In a life organized around a mechanism that ran entirely without observation for decades, A half-second of witness is not a small thing. It is, in practical terms, the difference between being the process and having the process. The difference is not dramatic. It is real. There are some things that do change more substantially, worth naming honestly, without inflation. The mornings are sometimes different. Not all mornings. But the specific phenomenon of the morning deficit, the tank already lower than it should be before the day has asked anything, occurs less often. Not because the mechanism has stopped, but because the witness, even imperfectly, catches some of what was being spent in the night, in the pre-processing, in the anticipatory labor that used to run entirely below awareness. Some of it gets seen now. Some of what gets seen gets set down before it depletes. The returns from interactions change quality slightly. Not every interaction, but genuine connection. The felt with rather than felt for, the contact that keeps the membrane intact, begins to feel distinguishable from the compulsive absorption in a way that it didn't before. They still feel similar in the moment, but afterward they feel different. One leaves something, one takes it. The ability to tell the difference retroactively at first, and then occasionally in real time, is new. And the question, did this start here, becomes habitual for some people. Not a constant interrogation of every feeling, just an occasional check, a moment of tracing. Did I arrive with this, or did I pick it up from the room? The answer is not always available, but the asking changes something. The asking is itself the witness. Maya will continue to notice her colleagues' tension in meetings. She will continue to be the person others come to. She will continue, in all likelihood, to be better than most people at reading rooms, managing emotional atmosphere, absorbing what needs absorbing in human situations that require someone with her particular wiring. She will also sometimes notice that she is doing it, and in that noticing, small, quiet, entirely undramatic, something will be different. Not transformed, not fixed, not resolved into a clean and spacious version of itself, just witnessed. She will drive home and not think about it again. She will make dinner without too much difficulty. She will check in on someone who is going through something, because that is who she is, and it does not stop being who she is. She will absorb something she probably didn't need to absorb. She will notice. And the next morning, she will wake up, and the tank will be slightly less empty than it used to be before she knew what was happening to it. Not full, slightly less empty. That is not a small thing. It is not a large thing. It is exactly the size of the real thing, which is the only size that was ever on offer. And it turns out that is enough. Not to fix it, not to end it, just enough to live with differently than you did before. Enough to know what it is. Enough to stop calling it by the wrong name. You started this book tired. Not physically tired. You know the difference by now. The other kind. The kind that lives underneath the tiredness. That sleep moves slightly to the side but never removes. That a good day at work temporarily displaces, and a vacation briefly interrupts, and a full night's rest addresses just enough that you can go back to the source of it the next morning. You know what the source is now. That is different from before. Not different in the way that changes everything overnight. Not different in the way the personal development industry would prefer, with a clean before and after, a transformation narrative, a list of things to do that will ensure the exhaustion does not return. Different in the quieter, more honest way that real understanding tends to be different from not understanding. You can see the mechanism now, the antenna, the absorption, the continuous, largely unconscious work of monitoring and carrying and metabolizing the emotional experience of everyone in your vicinity as though it were your own emergency. You can see it running. You could not always see it running. That gap between blindness and witness is not nothing. Here is what does not change. You are still you. The wiring is still there. The capacity for empathy that makes you exhausting to be is also what makes you the person people call, the person rooms change around, the person whose presence makes things genuinely better for the people you love. That does not go away. You would not want it to go away. Not really. Not if you are honest about it. It is, underneath the cost of it, something you would choose. The mechanism does not retire. The scanning continues. The absorption happens. You will still pick up the emotional freight of rooms you walk into before anyone has spoken. You will still find yourself 3 hours into a Tuesday carrying something that isn't yours, wearing it as your own mood, wondering vaguely why the day feels heavier than the morning deserved. The difference is that you will sometimes know what it is. And here is what does change. The name. You have been calling this tired. You have been calling it stressed, drained, overwhelmed, running on empty. All the words that aim in the right direction and land on the wrong thing. You have been treating it as an input problem, a schedule problem, a self-care problem, a sleep problem, a boundaries problem. You have been applying the correct solutions to the incorrect diagnosis and wondering why the results don't hold. The diagnosis was never about your schedule. It was never about what was on your calendar, or how much you were asked to do, or whether you were getting enough sleep or taking enough time for yourself. It was about what your nervous system does by default, in every room, on every interaction, regardless of what the calendar says, and what that default costs, accumulated invisibly across years of being the person who cannot stop feeling responsible for the emotional experience of everyone around them. That is a different problem. It has a different address, and now you have it. What you do with it is not this book's business. There is no prescription here, no list. No 7 steps towards sustainable empathy or whatever language would make this easier to sell. The understanding is the thing. The understanding is not a preamble to the real work. It is the real work. Because a mechanism you can see is a mechanism you have a relationship with, rather than a mechanism that simply runs you. You are not broken. You were never broken. You are a person with a specific and functional and costly way of moving through the world. A way that developed for real reasons, that served real purposes, that has real value alongside its real cost. Understanding it does not unmake it. It just means you are no longer alone in it. There is a witness now. Yours. The exhaustion will return. Tomorrow, probably. Or next week, or in the meeting where someone is quietly tense and your nervous system catalogs it before you've had a conscious thought. The mechanism will run. The tank will drain in the old familiar way, and you will know what it is. That is not a cure. It is not a resolution. It is not the ending you might have hoped for when you started a book about being tired in a way that rest doesn't fix. It is something else, smaller than a cure and more durable than one. The particular relief of a thing finally, accurately named, after years of calling it by words that were almost right and never quite enough. You are not tired. You are borrowed. You have been borrowed, quietly and continuously, by the emotional lives of everyone around you, for longer than you've been keeping track. You did not choose it exactly. You did not choose it exactly. You became it. The way people become the things they are. Gradually, sensibly, in response to what the world seemed to ask of you. You know that now, and knowing it, really knowing it, not as a concept, but as a recognition you feel somewhere below the sternum, in the place where true things land, is the beginning of borrowing yourself back. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a little, a half second at a time. That is how it goes. That is how it has always gone, for people who come back to themselves from a long way out. A little, and then a little more. And then one ordinary morning in a kitchen, reaching for something you thought wasn't there, finding it,